Recently we are seeing so many changes to champions that are already very broken, but only very few changes to champions that actually need those buffs. But how is that possible, what is happening, and how can we actually approach this in a tier list to help you climb more easily? So without any further ado, let's start with the Baron lane. Fiora is still the best carry champion up there, but other champions are getting closer and closer. So you know, Jace just got buffed, and he got buffed massively for, well, no reason. He wasn't really struggling in lane, he was only really struggling if the player wasn't good enough. However, he is still not the strongest champion in the Baron lane simply for the fact that a Fiora, like this champion deals so much damage, still instantly kills him and can itemize into plated steel caps, whereas the Jace, even if he does so, still lacks the damage to kill the Fiora during the mid game. However, if the Jace plays it perfectly, and I mean literally perfectly, then the Jace can win. But in WildRift terms, playing perfectly is not really an option and rarely ever happens. You know, still Vladimir also don't really put him out of the lane, he's still strong enough, and debuffs to Gwen make her even stronger than she was before. Again, you can always advocate for the little Teemo and Cannon to be put up one tier higher, but I really fear that they just don't have the utility or the tools to split push consistently, or basically take over teamfights and the lane and everything at the same time. However, if you're a Teemo or a Cannon one trick, you can still reliably play them in the Baron lane and make them basically into S tier picks. For the tanks, we have Ornn as the best pick, and if you play Inting Sion, well, you know the idea. Everything Inting with Hullbreaker works nowadays if your account just isn't good enough. We'll make a video on this, and maybe by the time this video releases, it's already out, so stay tuned. But nevertheless, what is your current take on the Inting Sion problem, or rather the Inting tank top lane problem? Garen, Volibear, Sion, all of these champions, and I've even seen a Gwen not even dealing tower damage and still climbing with a 90% win rate, and I think in close to Diamond Elo. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below, because I'm curious how you are actually experiencing this Sion or Inting Sion plague that's currently going on. Hey you, yes you, can you see this? So many people are not yet sub. Be honest, what's stopping you from subbing? Let me know in the comments below. For a jungle role, we don't really have that many changes. Lee Sin is still the best champion in the jungle department, even though Kha'Zix just got buffed. It's still basically a battle of the apex predators. You have Evelynn up there, you have Kha'Zix up there, and Lee Sin, and then other champions that basically counter each other, or are just very good. However, there was one slight change. Aatrox is going down one tier because his first ability's damage is so impactful that his damage during the clearing time is significantly reduced. And if Aatrox isn't snowballing, he is basically just a minion, and that is one of the biggest issues. Nyla, on the other hand, doesn't really feel the change to her first ability, because the ability beforehand was already dealing only 60% damage and now only deals 25%. So it doesn't really make that much of a difference because the splash auto attacks are not impacted by the nerf at all. Another new phase we are seeing right now again is Gwen in the jungle. Her clear speed got increased massively in direct comparison to before, and she deals so much damage and plays really well in how the current WildRift meta is being played, unless you're getting permanently invaded. One of the reasons why also Kayle works so well for so many people is because people simply choose to not do anything during the entire game and then randomly let the game go to 17-18 minutes, and then suddenly the Kayle one-taps you. But compared to the Kayle, the Gwen actually has tools to do so way earlier. All she needs is 2 items and the glorious endshot, and she runs you down. And as an AD carry main, or generally anyone that, well, fears this champion, which is basically everyone, you best believe if you have been receiving this treatment once, you will never forget this. And even if you're seeing a lot of Kayle players have a lot of success, it's not due to the nature of this champion being good, it's simply the environment it's being played in. So you can always make the argument that, well, maybe Kayle is not even that bad, but that's in reality not even that true. And here's the reason why. Just because a champion works due to the environment, it's not necessarily a good champion. It's because of the bad environment that allows the champion to look way stronger than it actually is. Therefore, a misconception starts to happen. The same goes for Sona. But honestly, what's your take on this? Because I'm very interested in making like a tier list simply from the statistics from the Chinese server. Like, they have different elos listed there from the official API on the Chinese server, where you can see what win rates, pick rates, ban rates, and everything these champions have in different elos. However, it's only solo queue and not legendary queue to my knowledge, so technically speaking, most of this data is more or less useless. Because for example, Kha'Zix and Lee Sin have relatively low win rates, whereas all AFK champions have very high win rates, and all of us know these champions are not necessarily balanced, but they don't really function well if 50 billion people play them with a high play rate, especially players that are not even good on them. And the more complex or hard to pull off a champion is, especially if you, well, basically die if you make a mistake, then the champion's win rate most of the time will not be as high, whereas a champion that has no responsibility, for example a Sona, a Janna, has or have very high win rates because you can barely do anything wrong with them, at least nowadays with all the reworks to them. And yeah, for the tank role we barely have any changes, so well, it's still the same, ladies and gentlemen. For the mid lane we still have Vladimir as the best mage, and I don't really think that one changed at all. Like, he lost a decent amount of damage on his first ability, but that was actually very much needed, and he is still very strong in how he scales, how he maneuvers the lane, and overall what he does, so I don't really think he is being removed as the best pick for the mage tier. Orianna also got an adjustment to her passive auto attacks and her base stats. In a recent video I said Orianna wasn't in the strongest spot right now, but due to how the game is being played she is rather decent, so she still remains in the S tier, but if anything she would be like an S- closer to A tier. The moment the Ziggs rework drops, Ziggs is going to be an S tier champion simply for the fact that he can just demolish towers from Giga Narnia range and nobody even cares. So in the end you'll actually see some inting Ziggs picks and it's going to be actually quite wild. Oh yeah, and if they didn't fix the Zyra bug on Kraken Slayer, then this champion would have been the best mage champion instead of the Vladimir. For the assassin tier we have Cassidy as the pick of the patch, or rather the strongest pick available. Everything below is slightly weaker and just doesn't do as much as Cassidy, especially if you consider the game flow in the current League of Legends WildRift. For the other tier you have to make a decision. Do you want to play Jace the most or Draven, because both champions are very powerful in their own regards and are really powerful picks when it comes to dominating the mid lane. If there's one change I've added to this is removing Camille from the A tier because she's more of a competitive pick, and reluctantly added Teemo. Due to how the game is currently going on and the people being oblivious towards Teemo's stealth, shrooms and any type of counterplay he has, Teemo just turns into a very decent pick when it comes to stomping noobs. People really are not aware of how much damage the champion can do, what his base kit even does, and how much he can roam towards other lanes with the help of his stealth. Nonetheless, he is a very short range champion, which makes it very difficult to play into long-ranged carries, especially if they pay attention to his stealth with the help of a control ward. With that, the Teemo cannot do his usual shenanigans and therefore be completely or get completely bullied as he's supposed to bully the opposition. Now let's talk about AD carries. Do we actually have any changes here towards the current meta on the AD carry position? Not really. A lot of the champions that were meta before are still meta now. Samira just got even more stronger with a proper support that engages for her and makes life a living hell for others. Lucian is still the champion that needs to dominate lane, and without that happening he just doesn't do anything because of how his kit works and how short of a ranged champion he is. Miss Fortune's damage buffs also really don't do anything for her because she already had fine damage during the laning phase, but was rather immobile and had big issues getting collapsed on and simply killed. But if you guys want elo, just lock in Tristana every single game, you cannot really do anything wrong with this. You can basically view her as the Sona of AD carry, which scales hyper hard into the late game, but is already super strong on level 5 simply because of a bomb and ultimate ability. She can one-shot any AD carry with this as long as they don't have exhaust, and even if they have exhaust, as long as you have exhaust, you're most likely going to win. But you have to keep in mind, you lose lane against most AD carries in the higher tier because of how much range they have and how much damage they do. But hey, it's WildRift, so you'll outscale them anyway. For the mages, we still have Ziggs as the best champion, closely followed by Zyra. Again, if Zyra was still bugged, Zyra would have been the best mage champion ever possible because it's just too goddamn broken. Other than this, we still have the same distribution of champions, and nothing really has changed because in solo queue, barely anything changes because the nerfs and buffs to champions minimally influence how the champion is played, unless they're like giga nerfs over 15 patches. For example, in the distant past, Samira wasn't that good, and then she got patch after patch after patch after patch with 15 buffs, and then she jumped from, for example, a low A tier champion to a very high S tier champion, but only in the right conditions. And even before, if you had the right conditions to pick her into, she was a very decent pick. But that's the problem with such niche champions. They need conditions to be played into, and then they're very strong. For example, you want to play tank Malphite, well, you obviously don't want to play tank Malphite into AP damage, because your entire kit is very centered around armor. So always keep that in mind when you pick certain champions, and try to understand what makes them strong, how they're strong, and what you can do with these champions to maximize your win rate. And no, I'm not talking about inting, because inting on AD carry or APC is rather troublesome, because winning with that is kinda harder than playing inting Sion. But hey, I've teased the inting Ziggs with the update on Ziggs on the 4th of January, so well, you gotta look out for that one. Now, last but not least, we go over to the support champions. Here we have Leona as the best engaged champion. Still, by the way, she's just so goddamn strong. Other champions than this are less reliable in what they're doing, or simply weaker, deal less damage, or less durable. You can basically pick your poison. For the protect tier, we'll have to talk about this, at least for a little bit. So you know, Sona is not really a champion from my perspective. If a champion only is good if the enemy is literally AFK, it cannot really be good. And in most instances, whenever I see a Sona, she goes 0-10 and maybe magically wins the game 20 minutes later, because the enemy team refuses to do any objective and just AFKs, which is literally something you can look into your own games into and just see, why are we just sitting mid AFK? Why is nobody doing no objective? Why is nobody playing? Why is nobody doing anything? And why is my 0-15 Sona magically winning the game when she has now 4 items because nobody chose to play the game? It is something you happen to see so many times, and it's not because Sona quote-unquote scaled into the late game, it's because people allowed her to do this. And this is not due to a Sona player's skill or the champion's skill in general, it's simply due to the inability to play the game. But there's one champion that's actually worse than Sona in the support role, and it's Morgana. You are literally not doing anything. Like, both of these champions are very selfish if you pick them, because they don't really contribute anything to what your team does and how lane is played. For example, Ayumi, the literal parasite, is an absolute demon during the laning phase. She can fight everyone during the laning phase, and if she ever gets low, she just attaches again. She features so much healing during the early game, so much damage, so many stats, that Sona looks like an absolute twig compared to this. Which is kind of funny, because you're literally a little magical cat writing a book compared to a flying whatever Sona is supposed to be. And now last but not least, we go over to the carry tier, and here we have Pyke. Quite interesting that Pyke got another buff. Again, Pyke as a champion can do many things so wrong that he instantly dies. But what can Sona, what can a support champion, a protect champion do, unless literally running into the enemy team that, well, gets them killed? AFK-esque champions like, for example, Janna, Sona, Soraka, all of these champions, well, you can basically say that Janna has very good map rotations, but you get the idea. Like, outside of this, there's very little things they can do wrong, and therefore their win rate, if they have specific abilities that allow them to scale due to the nature of the current WildRift games, they just take over the game in the later stages, even though I should never reach this because they're not good enough to play these champions. It is just a very hard thing to do and explain, and I really wish I had better words for this, but I think the closest I can get to is the champions are not inherently good, but they're allowed to look good because people are playing very poorly into them. Because the current matchmaking system allows you to climb even though you don't know what you're doing in a lot of instances, these champions are allowed to survive lane and everything, even though they should be killed over and over again because they can't defend themselves, they can't actively contribute towards laning because they're too weak stat-wise and spell-wise, and they just don't provide anything until the mid or late game. So please let me know what you think about this in the comments below. Maybe I can explain it a little bit better in words in a comment section, so we have like a little bit of a discussion, so I can make sure the point gets across without any like rudeness or toxicity that you think I'm having in this moment. But yeah, anyways, that is basically it for today's video. Thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and come back for more, especially if you want to see a Zeri support video for which I got ran down probably 6 or 7 times in a row, even though I had the highest damage and best stats on the team simply because people got upset that I picked Zeri support. See you in the next video.